Okay, my playwriting class, I'm going to help you guys out today. I sent you guys this email already about playwriting structure, but I want to spend some time actually going over it together. I think it's one thing for you to read through it, it's another thing for us to actually hear me talking about it. So we're talking about structure right now. You should have a lot of time to be able to write, and I imagine some of the things that you're writing about have changed. Um, what you're going through with this COVID-19 pandemic causes a whole lot of stress, and stress is bad, but it does oftentimes lead to really great art. I sent you guys a message at one point where I told you that Shakespeare wrote King Lear when he was on lockdown because of the plague, and that's true. And lots of other things have come out of stressful situations. So as much as this is a tough time, I want you to also look at this as an opportunity. You still should be writing every day. So we're going to talk now about structure. We haven't had to talk about structure for a while because I've been asking you to just kind of write a speech. But now we're going to look at some structure and figuring out how you can make a speech and into an entire story. Now, the first thing to know about writing is that there are many different ways to structure a play. There's not really any correct way to structure something. If you take a look at different great plays out there, they're all over the map. Some of them are chronological, some of them are thematic, some of them you have things that lead directly from one part of the story to the next, and many don't. So there's no right way to structure a play. For an example, I would look at Death of a Salesman. That breaks many structure conventions, you know? If you think about the plot map that you guys have seen in the past, I expect, Death of a Salesman doesn't fit that at all. You know, where is the beginning of that story? It kind of starts in the middle, where we already know what's going on with Willie Loman, that he's in trouble and stuff. He's already suicidal and stuff, and a lot of it has to do with flashbacks and stuff like that. And yet, it is still a brilliant play, even though it breaks structure conventions. So, when I'm talking about structure, please don't feel like these are ironclad laws that you cannot break. A lot of it really depends on what works for you or what works for the particular play that you're writing. But one way or another, you do need to figure out what kind of writer you are, because different writers are going to be doing things in different ways. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of writers, but there's kind of two large divisions that I like to talk about. The first one is a planner. Now, if you are a planner, what that means is that you like to have plans. You use outlines, you use character charts, you have everything planned out before you begin writing. In other words, you know before you write out the first scene where your climax is going to be. You know how many scenes there are. You know you're going to go first a scene here, then a scene there, then a scene there, and you've kind of got it all mapped out. Maybe you don't have every line planned, but you have the general structure of what story you're going to tell planned. That is one kind of writer. That's the kind of writer I am. I tend to plan out what I'm going to do long before I actually sit down and write it. I have the whole idea, or at least most of the idea, mapped out in my mind or frequently on paper. So if that's the kind of writer you are, then you are what I would call a planner. Now the opposite kind is what I call a pantser. A pantser doesn't plan. Instead, you write by the seat of your pants. You start off with maybe a concept or a character, and you just start writing. And you're not even sure where it's going to take you. You kind of start writing and kind of go along, following these characters, following these situations, following this world you've created, and see where it takes you. And oftentimes you're just as surprised by it as the audience is going to be. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a pantser. My wife is a pantser. My wife, the way that she writes, both my wife and I are novelists, so she writes more novels than her plays, but the same principle applies. And she will write by the seat of her pants a lot of times, and she's not exactly sure where it's going to go until she starts writing it. Now, the one problem with being a pantser is if you are a pantser, that usually means that you're going to need to spend a lot more time revising afterwards. But that's all right. If you're okay with that, then by all means, write by the seat of your pants. Some great art is done like that. Structure, though. Eventually, everyone needs to be aware of structure. You need to know how your play is set up in order for them to work it out. Building a story is a lot of ways like building a house. You start off with the walls, and and you need to have the walls in place before you can build the roof. Now, if it's not perfectly in sync at the beginning, that's all right. The audience will usually come along with you. But you got to build the walls before they build the roof. By which I mean, the audience needs to care about the characters before you put them in danger. Unless, of course, you don't want them to care about them if you're writing some sort of a comedy. I've seen a lot of beginning writers make exactly that mistake, where they'll start with the characters and just kind of introduce them and then suddenly put them in danger, and they expect the audience to care. And then the note I always give them is, okay, I don't care about these people. You need to first make us care about them. Make us get into their point of view, get into their objectives, what it is that motivates them. Basically, what I like to say is, let the audience be able to see themselves on the stage. And that's important. They don't need to find, characters don't often need to be good people, but they need to be relatable before you put them into danger, because if they're not relatable, the audience isn't going to care about them. So there's a lot of things you got to do. There's some things you got to do before you do other stuff, and so that has to do with structure. So a couple of other rules you should be aware of is there's something called the willing suspension of disbelief. Take a look at those three words: willing, suspension, and disbelief. So first of all, willing, that's something you've chosen to do. Suspension means holding something back, and disbelief, disbelieving it. So for example, in this little cartoon we've got this little alien and this man, and they're watching this movie, and the alien says, "This isn't real." And the man says, "Just enjoy the play." That's what I'm talking about. Of course we know when we're watching it that the thing we're watching isn't real. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a very important poet, not a playwright, but a very important poet, talked about that, about the willing suspension of disbelief. So an audience knows that the play that they're watching isn't real. For example, that guy on the stage, that's not an alien, it's a guy in a mask. Or those two people aren't really in love because we just watched them meet. Or we're not in Paris in the 1800s because we are in a theater in New York. We know that. Bertolt Brecht, if you remember talking about him way back in theater arts too, he used to make a good deal about this, trying to make sure the audience was aware that they are in a theater and this is not really happening. And the audience is actually smart enough to really know that. But by an act of will, an audience will hold off their disbelief in order to enjoy the play. Even though they know it's not real, they go ahead and pretend that they think it is, so that they can enjoy it. That's called the willing suspension of disbelief. Now this is what makes theater possible. This is your friend, the willing suspension of disbelief. The audience will suspend their disbelief. They will accept the idea that this character has fallen in love in 10 seconds, even though they know that's not a thing that can really happen. But don't take it too far. If you are asking your audience to willingly suspend their disbelief past their point that they can't do that, that you're going to lose them. So you need to make sure that you are building it up step by step. If you are not doing that, then you're going to lose your audience. Okay, Freytag's Pyramid. Most of you have seen this before. If you haven't, you should see it in your English teachers. We did talk about it in Theater Arts 1 as well. So just to remind you, most stories, at least in Western society, follow this map. If you start at the very bottom left there where it says exposition, you notice that's flat. Characters are walking along because it's a normal thing. This shows you what's normal for these characters. We meet these characters, learn what's normal. And then something happens that ticks them up. That's called the inciting incident. That's that point where the line hits a corner. And then we hit the rising action. And this is hard, and it works hard, and they got to work hard at it. And it takes longer than everything else. It's like them climbing up a mountain. All right, the rising action is very important because it builds tension. And it builds tension up until we hit what's called the climax. The climax usually is near the end of the play, and it's the point of the highest tension. When the climax has ended, we are then able to know how the play is going to end. So anyway, then we hit the falling action, which I like to say that the characters are sliding down this part because it's much, much easier for them to get by this, and certainly is quicker. But we go from that moment of climax back down to a flat space again. So now the denouement is what is now normal. And usually what is normal now is different than what was normal before, because the characters have changed. And that's one important structure, the one important way the plays are set up. If your play is set up that way, that's great, because you're telling a story that people will be familiar with. That's not the only, though, structure you can use. Here's another one. I like to use what I call the treehouse analogy for a three-act structure. So even though plays aren't always in three literal three acts, you can talk about them as being in three acts. In Act 1, you introduce a man and a tree. In other words, you introduce your characters and you introduce a situation. This kind of exposition, you make the audience care about the characters, and then you introduce a problem of some sort. Maybe the problem is that maybe you're doing the Hunger Games, and the problem is that every year 24 children are killed on national television. Or maybe it's more simple. The problem is that there's this guy that likes this girl, and the girl can't seem to, he can't seem to get her to pay attention to him. Whatever. There's an audience. There's a character with a problem. Then we have Act 2. In Act 2, you get that man stuck in that tree, and then throw rocks at him. That's what I call that's kind of equates to the rising action. The problem gets worse. You make that problem specifically apply to the character. You have your main character go to the Hunger Games, for example, and then you make it worse and worse and worse. Add complications, add problems. There's a writer, a novelist that I like a lot called Orson Scott Card, who has said this. He said, in order to keep your reader's sympathy, you need to keep your protagonist in pain. Now that's kind of sadistic, but it does work. If your character continues to be in pain, and if your audience continues to care about your character, then they'll keep on watching. This is what a lot of serials work at. I mean, you think about things like Grey's Anatomy or Stranger Things. Those characters continue to be in pain, scared, desperate, and that's what keeps our sympathy. And a lot of times, if those kind of movies want to continue going, they just keep their protagonists in pain, which some people can't stand that. But anyway, then you come to Act 3, and Act 3 is important if you're writing a single play, which is get the man out of the tree. Now, some people will say that, oh no, we should go ahead and make sure those characters stay in that tree forever. Then we can just keep on writing a play that goes on forever and ever and ever, like a television show that never ends. I actually consider that to be very bad writing. It's important that good writing has an ending. So in Act 3, you get that man out of the tree. Either they find a way to climb down, maybe they fall down. I don't know, but in some way they get out of the tree. That equates to the climax, the falling action, then the denouement. Find a way to get them out of the problem in order to be able to see how the play ends, either well or badly. But you need to have it end one way or the other. Now, in order to do this, we can also talk about what I call the story spine. Your spine is part of your back it basically holds the whole structure of your body. The spine of a story, in the same way, is the skeleton the rest of it hangs on. If the spine of the story is strong, then it's okay if there are a few stumbles. It's okay if everything isn't perfect. But it'll be hard for you to get everywhere that you want to be. And there's a link right there to a video about the story spine, and I will put that in the description down below. I recommend that you go to that video if you're not quite understanding what I mean by the story spine. That will help you to be able to understand what I'm talking about. But your spine is kind of the through line to be able to understand the entire story. If your spine of your story is strong, it's all right if everything doesn't perfectly fit. Anyway, watch that video so you know what I'm talking about. All right, now your homework is to write the story spine of your play. And I've got a paper that I sent to you that you can download and open it up and check it out. And that will help you be able to know what it is. And so what I want you to do is think about the story that you're going to write and fill in that thing. The story spine worksheet basically says, okay, once upon a time, and finish that sentence. And then every day, and finish that sentence. And so forth. There's like 7 different sentences to finish. And if you finish those sentences with reference to your play, then you will have given me the spine of the story. So for homework, I want you guys to fill that out. Fill out the spine of your story and send it back to me. And remember, I still want you to be writing every single day. because that's what a writer does. A writer writes, always. Talk to you later.